Morning, everybody. Good morning. Very good to see you. So, some of the same faces as yesterday, which is very nice. It's nice to spend time together and study our divine principle. It's always a great pleasure and interesting task for me. And for those who were here yesterday, I give you an extra little bit of homework, as it were, or work to do, because see how many references you can recognize from yesterday's content in today's message, right? The topic I want to share is seeking the essence of Jesus. Seeking the essence of Jesus. And this term, the essence of Jesus, I think it originates with our founder, our true mother, Mother Moon. This is a phrase that she uses quite often in her recent speeches, how we need to really seek for and find the essence of Jesus. She knew and knows Jesus from her early age, really was born into that kind of environment and had a very close relationship from her early age, as of course did our true father. He encountered Jesus very profoundly and strongly when he was 15 years old, and that relationship carried on all through his life. It was a very meaningful and very productive relationship, very real relationship, which he had all the time. So when our true mother came to Europe, when was that last time? May, right?
Munich.
In Munich. Someone was particularly happy about that, right? Yes, we all gathered in Munich, and that was an amazing experience. And you might remember or have noticed that when Mother took to the stage, then she said, I am here with Jesus. I am here with Jesus. Or even she put it as a question, who do you think I am here with? I can't remember the exact phrasing, but it was with Jesus. So that was her awareness and her strong feeling that maybe by arrangement she was there really together with Jesus. Maybe some people could see Jesus. I didn't. But I kind of felt his presence through those words. And I'm sure she would have been thinking and praying about the importance of Europe when coming to this part of the world, which she loves, actually, really very much loves European culture and European family of brothers and sisters. It's very dear to her heart. And of course, together with our true father, Father Moon, she came many times and also on her own. So indeed, she would have been thinking about the importance of Europe because it's a seat of Christianity. This is where Christianity, on its kind of journey westward from Jerusalem, started to develop, and Rome, and then into rest of Europe. So the territory is the place of major historical development for the Christian world, and from there to go out to far-flung countries and to spread around the world. And it's an extraordinary story. And when you think of the beginnings of Christianity that was so difficult, a persecuted minority who really you would think had no chance of survival, actually grew and developed despite such intense opposition and many people giving their lives for their faith, and yet it won through and became so prominent in the world. Quite extraordinary history. And, we include Middle East as well, right, in our Europe region, Europe and the Middle East, or EUME, region. And that's including, of course, Jerusalem. It's including King David's royal city, as we sometimes refer to it, and the place of Jesus' birth. Just outside Jerusalem was Bethlehem. It's visible. If you haven't been there, it's quite surprising to realize when you stand on the kind of wall of Jerusalem, you look across and you see the next little hillside with a few houses on top of it. And I remember asking somebody, what is that little village over there? And they said, oh, that's Bethlehem. It was quite magical, to hear that. So, not far away. Nothing is very far from anywhere else in the Holy Land. And you can imagine then Jesus walking and traveling the length and breadth of that particular area and getting to know these places very well. So when you go to the Sea of Galilee, these kind of words, which if you have a Christian upbringing, you hear these from early age, magical kind of poetic sounding words. You don't know quite what they are, but when you're young, but you hear about the Sea of Galilee, and it's a beautiful sounding name. And then when you go there, you'll find actually it's like a lake where you see a ring of mountains around it. You can see the whole ring. So it's within your kind of visual grasp. And this is where so many important things and stories of the Bible took place. So Jerusalem was, in the Middle Ages, considered to be the center of the world. They referred to it actually as the world's belly button, right? Everybody's got a belly button, right? So the world has one, and it's Jerusalem. So things were born from there, kind of has a spiritual meaning, obviously. And medieval maps, if you get a chance to see one, they always have Jerusalem in the very center of the map. And that's everything else kind of revolves around there in the medieval mind, the Christian mind of Europeans of that time. So with the nation of Israel, or the kind of hometown of Jesus, even in its day, it was something, probably a little bit of a backwater, right? Not such a major place. And it's said that with a procurator like Pontius, who figures as this kind of major figure at the end of Jesus' life, but it was a kind of, safe retirement place. Somebody who's basically done their public mission, they can be sent off to Jerusalem and they can look after that little area of the world, which didn't cause the Romans too much trouble. That's why the Romans largely left it to just run itself, and Jews could get on with their religious practice and do whatever they did. It wasn't hurting anybody, so the Romans kind of had that kind of tolerance probably much of the time. But even so, it had meaning. And when you look at those medieval maps, you see it's at the center of a kind of crossroads. It is at the crossroads between Asia and Africa and what we know as Europe today. So it had a central place, and God will choose such places, which are also the meeting place and the potential meeting place of cultures, because where the Messiah is born is where God wants to initiate the kind of coming together of nations and the development of a unified culture which will bring people together. So with the setting of Israel within the Roman Empire, and it's kind of, you can imagine it's part of the Mediterranean rim. We talk about the Pacific rim nowadays, don't we? Where the kind of providence is moving and development is taking place. But at that time, the big kind of rim was the Mediterranean rim. And that was part of this area of the world. Of course, St. Paul traveled all around there in his missionary journeys. And it was a place that was prepared to give birth to a unified culture. In fact, I think it could be that very prominent in that process, or potential process, was Pompeii and Herculaneum. They were really such meeting places of cultures. but were destroyed in the end. There was no opportunity for this kind of transformation to take place 2,000 years ago. So the teaching at the heart of our movement, our unification movement, this extraordinary contribution to human thought that we were looking at yesterday, the divine principle, it quietly revisits many fundamental concepts and doctrines of Christianity. We looked at some yesterday. And it presents a different understanding or a different viewpoint. You can say it's like a renewed understanding. I don't think, in my mind, it's as a direct challenge. It's just, important to see things now in a different light. And this is providing us a way to do that. Some of those aspects of Christian thought, they go, of course, right back to the beginnings and the major councils in the 4th century, when certain things were being decided on, Christological arguments, this kind of thing about the nature of Jesus or the relationship between Jesus and God and the Holy Spirit. And then later in European Christianity, around the 13th century, we had the introduction of the thought of Aristotle, largely, because people had been rediscovering those ancient Greek philosophers. And you might know they came through or were revived in Europe through the Arabic versions, which were translated, and major philosophers from that blooming culture at that time, Averroes or these kind of philosophers, they passed this down, and it was picked up by Christian scholars who were looking for a kind of intellectual underpinning for Christian belief to be able to make advance and solidify their kind of position intellectually in European society as it was growing and developing. So, these were taken up by people like Albertus Magnus, or Thomas Aquinas is maybe a more familiar name, and this underpinned Christian theology and produced out of that a dominant intellectual movement in Europe. It really became kind of a Christian Europe in those centuries, shaping the intellectual landscape. So we think of the Hellenistic culture of Greece as being on the kind of, we say, the Cain type side. It's this side which is contrasted or complementing the tradition of Hebraism, which leads into Christian thought, where it's God-believing and it's based on faith, but more science and reason is being developed through the Hellenic culture, and great accomplishments in both, but maybe the more external accomplishments through the Greek and Roman culture, and quite extraordinary in its own way. But each of those having kind of good and bad elements, and certainly Greek and Roman culture had bad elements as well as good and really lasting ones. In the Greek philosophy, it tended to be dualistic, so an idea kind of got passed on, and I think got fed into Christianity at that time more strongly than before, that the viewpoint that if something is true, and what we believe is true almost by definition, right? What my church believes, this is the truth, right? So if something is true, then everything that is different from that is false. And it's a recipe for a lot of enmity between different religious viewpoints. Some people will be receiving revelations that things were different. Are you going to be true to your revelation? And you have to then declare something, but then it's considered as being heretical, and even at the worst times of religious conflict, you would be maybe burnt at the stake. You would be put to death because of your belief by your fellow Christians, right? Because almost like to save you, because you were going down the wrong path. So for your own sake, we're putting you to death. It's crazy, isn't it? Right? So amazing how we can get so twisted in our thinking, right? So you can see how it develops, that people think, if I'm on God's side, then people who have different views to me, they must be then on the side of the devil. And that sets a distance and a gap between people. So we were, as a result, to see much kind of division and much warring between different factions in Christianity. Greek philosophy then defines God as a perfect being. That is something that is perfect, and as a perfect being cannot suffer. Because something that is perfect, by that definition, can't suffer. So suffering itself is like an imperfection. It's something which deviates from what is the ideal. So God as a suffering God becomes written out in people's understanding. And it's actually divine principle and our true parents' thought that starts to, alongside just a very occasional other scholars or theologians, starts to reintroduce the idea of God as a suffering God, a God of heart. And we talked about that yesterday. It's more apparent, actually, when you go back to Jewish scripture. You see these references to God and God's suffering, or God grieving, or God sorry that he had made man, these kind of ideas. But it's part of the revival that our true parents are bringing, to think of God as a suffering God. And Father used to talk and say that much of his prayer was about comforting God, bringing comfort to God. Even saying, no, don't worry about me, I will take care of things. I will end your suffering. Having this kind of heart as a loyal and filial son. So it's something very beautiful, which he not only kind of thought that way or spoke that way, but lived his life that way. And that was the powerful example that we can pick up on and recognize and be inspired by, actually. So another quiet contribution, I would say, that divine principle makes is almost to give us permission to ask a particular question. And that question is, what if? In much of the religious world, that's not a kind of question you can ask, right? And I don't know if you appreciate that or not, but divine principle essentially, although it doesn't word it that way, it's allowing us, or giving the result of, if we do think differently, if we allow ourselves to think differently, this is what comes out. So it's sometimes thought even as a kind of heretical thing to do, right? To ask those kind of questions about Christian belief, for example. How can you do that? This is what the church teaches, and we shouldn't go against the church teaching. And if you do, there's something a little suspect about you, right? And we have to keep an eye on you. So, if not heretical, in Christian circles, it shows that there's a kind of hidden predestination going on there. Rather, it's like saying that because things happened a certain way, they were meant to happen that way, and you don't question the intention of God, or, you'll be in a kind of place where you don't have any foot to stand on. So let's just stick with the teaching, and then we'll feel all a bit more comfortable about that, right? So there are these questions. For example, what if Jesus' family had stayed true to the revelations that they received prior to Jesus' birth? Mary and Joseph. What about Zechariah, father of John the Baptist? What if he had stayed true to the revelation that he received at that time? Or even, what if John the Baptist had become the chief disciple and main supporter of Jesus? Divine principle quite easily talks about that should have been the way. But prior to stating that is this kind of question: what if things had been different? What if our understanding up to now, we just have to, I don't say put aside, but we have just to allow ourselves to think, what if things had gone differently? What if Jesus had been recognized with the full support of the religious authorities of the day as the Messiah that they were waiting for, the Jews were really anxiously and seriously waiting for? And, their history of prophecy was leading to that. They had a sense of expectation that that era, that decade was the time when things were really going to happen. And there was an atmosphere of heightened spirituality at the time of Jesus' birth. It was all coinciding, really, at that time. Even the temple had gone through renovation and reconstruction about 15 years before or something, Jesus' birth. So it's kind of getting ready, this idea of let's get ready because the Messiah's coming soon, right? Very exciting time. But of course they didn't recognize Jesus in that role, and Jews still don't do that till this day. So what if things had been different, as surely they were meant to be? There are so many what ifs, really, aren't there? But here, whether we appreciate it or not, I think we're allowed to ask those questions, which already shows, I think, maybe God trusting us. That's my interpretation. God is trusting us with a kind of maturity in this area. And he needs a much wider audience than just ourselves, of course, to trust the messages which are coming through now very loud and clear, that we have to rethink. That's not to dismiss what we knew before, but it's absolutely to think of things afresh and in a new light. So the story that the principal tells and that Father Moon reveals about Jesus is a very remarkable and indeed a heartbreaking story when you come to understand it from this perspective as somebody who was so earnestly striving to do God's will and fulfill his purpose that is given by God, but not allowed to do it, not able to fulfill that. That means he would die with certain real frustrations in his heart and some feeling of having not done all that he was asked to do, even though he did his very best. And it wasn't any personal failing, it was really the failing of the part of humankind to respond and to recognize the very special time in which they were living. So Jesus has been in somewhere made into something a little bit unreal in the theology that's developed over 2,000 years. I mean, that's a big distance, right, from actual historical happenings and what we are dealing with today. So, yes, certain ideas, I would say, and viewpoint of Jesus became rather unreal. Ideas about him existing at the time of creation with God, at the right hand of God, words that sound very stirring and very encouraging. But when you start to think about the reality of that, what does it mean? Or that Jesus who existed from the time of creation came down to earth and took human form. Well, what kind of process is that? How does that happen? It's curious. It leaves certain things unanswered, but under the kind of era where churches had a lot of dogma, kind of unproven beliefs that in a way, through faith, you just had to accept, then that was the answer always, right? No real questioning, and certainly no asking, what if? Right? So, I have a little book here, which I want to show you. It's called Everyone's Guide to the Hereafter. It's by a chap called Ken Akehurst, but it says through G.M. Roberts. So these are, English people, they're a bit strange for a start, right? But also they're quite a lot of kind of spiritualist type people in England and in the UK. So it's not unusual to see these kind of things. But there are spiritualist groups and spiritualist churches. Maybe you have that here with a history like Swedenborg and people in this part of the world. So this is Ken Akehurst. Now these were friends, these two people, Ken Akehurst and G.M. Roberts, and they were part of a spiritualist circle. And particularly this person, Ken Akehurst, he went blind some time later in his life. He lost his sight, and when he lost his sight, he became very spiritually open, a kind of compensation, for his loss of physical senses, with opening of his spiritual senses. Anyway, with his friend, who was also a kind of spiritualist, they made an agreement, right? Can you guess what that was? They said, whoever goes first, right, come back and tell the other what it's like, right? Right? So they both trusted each other's ability as mediums, so they made this arrangement, and it was poor old Ken who went first, right? Blind, but when he got to the spirit world, he could see perfectly normally, because that's a physical disability, and as we talk about in the principle as well, that's not a restriction that's there anymore when you go to the spiritual world. So he could see, and indeed he came back, and this is his kind of spiritual readings through his friend G.M. Roberts. Anyhow, let's think about this. What did he say? Well, I'm going to skip quite a bit. It's not 100% right, I would say, because that's also understandable. We say, the revelations come from a certain level of the spiritual world, so we can't always expect it to be, or shouldn't assume it's God's voice and the absolute truth. It can be kind of different levels of truth, right? But here in chapter 13 of this book, this is what he says from the spirit world. Now, this is not a noted person. He's not a famous person. This book is not famous. I just came across it on one of these bookshelves in London in a bookstore near the British Museum, and it was, it's not a well-known book by any means. So I wasn't expecting much, to be honest, right? And anyway, these books, they tend to be, they're anecdotal. What can you prove? They're people's stories. You could say, well, somebody just made that up. They just wrote it like a novel. You can't argue so much against that. But somewhere, the nature of this, and when I read you a little section, maybe it makes you think, would somebody really sit down and make it up this way? So he says here, he's talking to his friend, now the new life. He's talking about life in the spirit world, right? That is as good a way of starting this chapter as any, for it sums up what you are in for when the time comes for your passing. Jesus said you should always be ready, for you never know when your call may come. And as always, he is right. I've been asked many times since I've been over here to tell people still on the earth plane, that's us, right, what I know about Jesus. The first and foremost thing is to confirm that he is and was what he said during his short time on earth, the Son of God. And therefore the Jews made their biggest mistake in having him put to death. If he had been allowed to live, he would have gone on teaching, and in the end been accepted by all as the Son of God, and the world would have become a better place for it. Wow. But man has free will, and he was put to death, and the plans made by God were thwarted. Oh yes, he says, this is so don't throw your hands up in horror. God's plans are being thwarted on the earth plane all the time. Wow, what do you think about that? And he goes on to say, for the Jews in particular, when they arrive over here and find out what a wonderful gift God had given them and how they threw it away and rejected it, their grief is great. There are some who teach that the crucifixion had to be, that it was part of God's plan. This is absolute nonsense. God would not have a plan such as that. No. The people at that time wanted Jesus put to death, and the way the Romans carried this out at that time was by crucifixion. As simple as that. If the Jews had accepted him, and many of them did, but were afraid to come out into the open, then God's plans for the world would have flourished. But man made his choice, and it was the wrong one. So, when I read that, I just, wow. It was also a little bit of a judgment because, reading this and even reading it again, what's striking to me is that this person is very unafraid to say that, right? Just saying it like it is. We unificationists, we have much of the same understanding, but I think we're very cautious, right, about how we word it, and rightly so, but we have to recognize that. We have, I suppose, not wanted to cause upset or create enemies, and we certainly don't want to do that. And at times it does feel quite difficult to bring our message boldly and clearly because it can intensify the kind of opposition or reaction. But also we have to remember that, in the early days, Father Moon in particular was trying to make these important overtures to the Christian world or Christian leaders in Korea. And if they had accepted, then things would have gone very differently. But because of their rejection, then he had to build a foundation, which should have been done very easily by existing Christianity, but actually had to build a new foundation, almost from nothing, and build a worldwide unification church. If you look back to those early speeches, he says his intention was never to create another church or denomination, but somewhere had to build that foundation to do the work that Christianity should have done, to be able to receive eventually true parents. So that meant like a delay. So it's quite understandable that at that time want to work as a kind of substitute for Christianity. But that era has ended already, right? So we're into an era where we are family federation, and that's part of the reason for the changing from Unification Church, although that wasn't the official name, Holy Spirit Association, for the unification of world Christianity, changing that or making the central providential organization the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification. So there's no reference to that kind of early Christianity. It's more open to all people. It's centering on the family level salvation rather than individual salvation, and it's more inclusive even of other faiths. And that was always Father Moon's intention from the beginning. So it's a natural development, but there was this 40 or 43 year period, actually the most golden years of Father Moon's life, which he had to kind of sacrifice in a way. It doesn't always come through that way because he was always uncomplaining about it in public speeches and never, expresses that kind of heart, which I'm sure he harbored in himself, that things have been made so difficult to bring this message to the world, and yet he was determined to do it in his lifetime. Come what may, he would make sure that that foundation would be there. And at the end of his life, and continuing now with Mother Moon's work, there's a foundation there which is quite extraordinary. No religious leader has done that in their lifetime. It always took in the next kind of centuries after their death for this kind of level of foundation worldwide to be built. So that's something. That's why sometimes, I don't know about you, but as a unificationist, I kind of oscillate, between one time things seem to be going so well, we're a step away from saving the world and bringing in God's kingdom, and then you think somehow we're so small and we're not getting anywhere, and we're kind of, what's the impact that we're really having? And you kind of oscillate between these two things. Well, that if you don't have this just shows my kind of lack of faith or understanding, I think, right? So, but hey, we're young actually, right? This movement is young, and it did have this kind of 43-year hiatus whereby, had to go a different course to make a worldwide foundation and then come back and start again. But starting again, how much in gear are we? That's the question. Are we just carrying on in the kind of way which we used to because that was the habit? Or can we think differently? So I'm just throwing these ideas out today, really, so that we can think, is this now the time to do something differently? I would say it very much is. So I believe we have to give kind of serious thought to this. How would it go down if, as unificationists, we were much clearer and much bolder in expressing our understanding? What do you think? Divine principle has a real advantage to me. It doesn't present itself as dogma or just church doctrine. It's much more than that. We were talking about that in our discussions yesterday. It's kind of, it's to do with life itself. So is it theology? Is it philosophy? It's hard to pin down, actually. It's something unique, a mixture of those things, something of each of those things, but yet it's also coming out of lived experience, and that's the real life experience of Father and Mother Moon. So it's that experience which gives it some kind of quality and some kind of integrity in itself as something which can stimulate the human heart when you hear about it and you hear it in context. So I think that's very important. I have a chance in my work, especially the work I'm doing in the UK, is to bring divine principle to Christian ministers. That's very interesting, and it's it still is a journey that I'm on, trying to find out how to do that and how to do it best. By nature, God put a person in that position, namely me, who by nature doesn't like conflict, right? I really don't like it, right? So I love theology, but I don't enjoy, we have the expression Bible bashing. Do you know that one? You know that one, right? So you meet these people, they just want to trade, Bible verses or something with you as a kind of things to hit you with, which, I'm really not interested in that. So I've kind of developed my own approach, I suppose, or way of arguing things that I'm convinced by, and I try to apply in my teaching as well. What I do is I say, and I genuinely believe this, it's not just a kind of ploy, I say to people, I'm in no way saying, when I'm teaching divine principle or just talking to you, I'm in no way saying that what we have believed up until now is wrong. I'm not saying that at all. So traditional Christian understanding of the topics we're talking about, is it wrong? No, I'm not saying it's wrong at all. I don't believe that. After all, these ideas, they've given people tremendous, profound, life-changing experiences down through centuries. They propelled Christianity to that world stage as a religion with the largest number of adherents worldwide. And it's extraordinary history, right? And I would say the same to people of other faiths. I'm not saying that what you believe in is wrong. I'm not challenging that. But rather, it's not a question of right or wrong. It's more that wonderful understanding was for a particular time. Not everybody is going to accept this argument or feel comforted by it. That's also true. But still, it's a better approach, I find. Not, the things that we've understood up to now were for then. But this message which I'm sharing with you now is for now, is for this time. God is revealing it through Father Moon and our true parents, revealing this message, divine principle, for now, because it's part of God having us get ready for the second coming and for everything that's coming, which is really positive, right? And we need to get ready, so we need to know these things. Now, again, not everybody's going to accept that or buy that, But that's okay. That's okay. There are plenty of people who are. Right? And that's one reason why our first kind of area of success has been with the Pentecostal churches. Right? Many people coming from Pentecostal churches, they know their Bible inside out. If they wanted to Bible bash you, they could, right? But that's not their heart or intention as Pentecostal ministers. Not at all, no. The Bible is something alive and real to them. And also they're praying. Many of them are meeting and praying, sometimes prayer vigils like a Friday night from midnight till 4 o'clock in the morning. They're doing this, or as a congregation they're fasting from Friday through to Sunday, and they'll break their fast after the Sunday service. You know, they're doing this, and a lot of the questions they're asking are, God, show us the way. Show us how the second coming is going to take place. Show us what I must do. Give us some signs in this kind of area. They're open to new ideas and new revelation because they feel, it's the Holy Spirit that leads us. So often you won't find crosses at the front of Pentecostal churches, right? Because it's all springing more from God's work from Pentecost onwards as the kind of new age. Of course, believing in Jesus' salvific effects of his death and resurrection, but not focus only on that, or not stuck in that, open to new ideas. So this is very wonderful. And, Jesus faced similar difficulties, right? There were people in his time who were very stuck in the old ways of thinking, and religious leaders who were stuck in those old ways of thinking and old attitudes. And that became, of course, one of the main obstacles to Jesus making some breakthrough or being recognized or being welcomed and being successful in that sense. But even then, of course, not all people were like that. There will be some who are really already receiving or coming round to certain views that align with divine principle. There are people, out there. They may be even priests. They are giving one kind of message to their congregation, but privately they're having questions, right? They're thinking, I don't quite go along with this aspect, right? But, for the sake of, upholding church teaching, I present it differently, right? Yeah, I've met people like that. I have one good American friend. His name is Reverend Dr. Paul Baden Adams, Dr. Adams. He would be very active amongst us now, except that he has a serious health condition with his back. He's almost bedridden. But when I met him, he was very active as a very sporting person. And it was 2 weeks before we had the first World Culture and Sports Festival. Do you remember that, as Unificationists? That started a kind of interesting series of developments, World Culture and Sports Festival. And I was asked to send from Britain if I could find somebody who could be a Christian chaplain for all the participants in this sports festival. And, 2 weeks before we had to send somebody, and I had no idea who to send, I met this minister with a great interest in teaching young people about sport, and a very active American preacher. So a remarkable man. And I had to get him kind of prepared for what he was going to meet in Korea when he went to our movement's event. So I taught him divine principle in 1 day, right? We had a 1-day seminar, 1-to-1. And he was very willing and very inspired by what he heard. Right? And he was amazed. In particular, one thing that struck him was our understanding of John the Baptist, because we talk about John the Baptist not following Jesus and not giving the support that he should have done. And he said when he was a minister in America, he had worked with an evangelist called Billy Graham. Have you heard of the name Billy Graham? Very world famous, actually, in the 60s especially. He was kind of filling stadiums all around the world as an evangelical preacher. A very amazing man. And he worked with Billy Graham's team. And he said, one day I went up to, Billy Graham, and I asked him the question, Reverend Graham, why is it that John the Baptist never followed Jesus? And Billy Graham replied, you will have to read my Bible commentary when I write it to get the answer to that one. Right? Which, if you read between the lines, is mean I can't answer that question right now, right? You'll have to wait until my book is written and published, and then you'll maybe get your answer. So I thought that's very curious. So we laughed about that. And, this is interesting, isn't it? People getting parts of these things, because truth is universal and God is working everywhere. So that combination means, things are kind of probably more prepared than we imagine. So Christian theology served its purpose over a certain period of time, but as with any kind of idea that has its time, it can then become a block. And that's sad to see that happen. If that were to happen, it would be, a great tragedy. But you can also see that, Christianity is, in certain forms, is losing ground, is becoming less popular, more kind of sidelined, less influential, less deference towards the ideas, and problems within churches as well, adding to that. So it's time for a change. And True Mother herself has talked and used an analogy of like it's time to get off the bus. We've been going along in this bus for a long time, which represents all the kind of religious leaders of the world. But, your bus is to take you somewhere, isn't it? From A to B. And when you get there, you have to get off the bus. So that's very important. Also, you might know or have seen in some of our activities, our international activities, the figure of Bishop Noel Jones, who is a very well-known preacher in America, is supporting our work very much. And he described this to his congregation. He has a large church, 6,000 member church in Los Angeles, the City of Refuge Church. He's a very amazing preacher and scholarly person as well. He said to them, what we have to do. He's trying to think and tell them how to kind of be ready to receive divine principle, essentially, and the blessing which true parents are bringing. He's absolutely okay with it, but his congregation has to follow. So he described it like, he said it's like a trapeze, right? A trapeze that you have in a circus, right? And somebody can be swinging on the trapeze, and that's like, the religious leader who won't get off the bus, right? Right? You're swinging on your trapeze, you're feeling okay, right? This is all right, yeah, it's good, everything's all right, and you're swinging, but then, for your purpose of your act, there's another swinging trapeze somewhere else out there, right? And at some point you have to let go. You have to let go and have that faith to go and leap out and catch the next one. And it's always scary, isn't it? I mean, that's the excitement of watching somebody do this. You think, are they going to make it? Are they going to catch it? And they do, right? So it's a great relief in the crowd. It's, very stirring. But that's kind of spiritually, he said, that's what we have to do. We have to be ready to let go. So he was meaning a very clever way of talking, right? He's saying, there are certain beliefs that they're so dear to us, we feel we'll never let go of these. We have to grip onto those. But actually you have to let go. It's in let going that your whole thing takes another dimension, right? And you can grab onto something new, right? And you'll have all the support of the crowd with you. So when our True Mother is saying you do not know the essence of Jesus, or even talking about that, kind of addressing the Christian world, it sounds almost, in another century it would have just been declared heretical, wouldn't it? But, it almost sounds arrogant to say that, but it's not meant in any way arrogantly or coming from that kind of heart. The fact is you don't know the essence of Jesus, actually. Yeah, so Christian world might be thinking nobody knows it better than us, right? But yet, You have to be open to letting go of the trapeze and grasping something else. So the 12 disciples of Jesus, they were a group of course, devoted followers. They knew Jesus well. They'd given up their regular way of life to go around the country with him, and they were involved in baptizing and in witnessing and in testifying to Jesus. And they sat at his feet and they listened to him. They were in awe of him at times and maybe frustrated by him at times, I don't know, and not understanding everything. And there were even more amongst the disciples of Jesus, dedicated women who loved Jesus and knew him and saw something in him which they felt they wanted to give their life to. And yet we have in the Bible, this is an amazing thing about the biblical source, is that it includes all these things. We have stories of 3 main disciples who are asked by Jesus the night before his crucifixion or arrest to pray with him in the Garden of Gethsemane, but they fall asleep, right? And then he says, well, just stay awake. You don't even have to pray, just stay awake. But they can't do that. They fall asleep again. So 3 times they are asked, but they can't stay awake. So I'm wondering myself, all the vigil prayers which you're encouraged to do now, this kind of indemnifying this period of history. Maybe we're on number 1,117 this last Friday of these vigil prayers that go, they start at 10 o'clock in Korea, or through to 1 o'clock and sometimes later, every morning. So 6 days a week they've been going on continuously for that number of days. It's really something, a great investment, and people joining in now all around the world through the internet, and it comes out at different times, of course. But, joining in these prayers, a great movement for prayer and revival and sharing of testimonies, and seeing the, real development in the activation and moving of the spiritual world. So when Jesus was arrested, what happened? His disciples scattered. Those people who were with him, they ran away. They went back to their life, essentially. And these stories are included for all people to see. But, that was part of those people's testimony. We thought like that, but then we met the resurrected Jesus. And when we met the resurrected Jesus, our life really changed. And we thought differently. So what does that mean when we see such a transformation between the disciples prior to Jesus' death, where they run away, and even closest disciple Peter denies that he knows Jesus. 3 times he does that. But at the time of his resurrection, and when they see Jesus in his resurrected form, they go through this total transformation so that they are all ready to give their life for Jesus. And all but one of the disciples does. They die an unnatural death, or a martyr's death. It means something must have convinced them to their core, right? And they changed. What it means is they thought they knew Jesus before, and compared to other people, they were very loyal and faithful, and they were giving up a lot to follow Jesus. So they thought they knew Jesus, but they didn't really know him. Even they didn't really know him. And that's a kind of profound lesson for us, for anybody who's kind of following a religious path. You may think you know, but do you really know? And it comes down to us. And we talk as part of our faith about the true parents. Do we know true parents? Do we really know? I'd have to conclude that I don't really know, actually. So is there something more to be awakened to? There probably is, right? And, getting to know somebody is quite difficult, isn't it? Anyway, even if you're with them all the time, even, amongst partners, it's difficult to know each other, really. So do you really know? Of course, you don't want to say that to somebody. You don't say, do you really know me? You can't do that, because we all know it's difficult, right? But it's a reasonable question. So to say, do we know the essence of Jesus, or we need to know the essence of Jesus, there are things that we need to know that maybe at the moment we don't know, right? So that's my thought today. If we can bring the truth as we understand it about Jesus, that's deeper, more insightful knowledge coming from the experience of our true parents, and then people add their own experience to that, of the real Jesus. If we can bring that to people, starting with myself, then I'm sure we can advance the very things that Jesus dedicated his life to saving the world and to really bringing about a transformation in our society from this. Do you remember what True Father used to refer to as the quiet revolution? The quiet revolution from selfishness to unselfishness. Right? So let's resolve to be participants in that. Thank you very much, everyone.